All right, it is 6:30 and I would like to call this meeting of the Community Development Committee to order. While this meeting is being held in person, we are also offering the option for the public to participate through Zoom if preferred. Instructions on how to attend virtually are included on the City Council calendar item listed on the front page of missionks.org. The public is also invited to participate in the meeting. If you are participating through Zoom, please either add your comment in the chat feature and it will be read out loud, or note that you would like to speak and we will call on you to shortly to make your comment verbally. Please remember your comments or questions are visible to everyone in the meeting. If you are part of our in-person group tonight, please raise your hand but stay seated and we will call on you to the lectern to make your comment. When you make your comment, please state your name and city of residence for the record. Also be conscientious of others trying to speak and speak slowly and clearly. This meeting will be recorded and posted on the city's website at missionks.org. Please contact the administration offices at 913-676-8350 with any questions or concerns. Ms. Folks, please call the roll.
Thomas, Loudon.
Here.
Byard,
Here.
Inman,
Here.
Chociej,
Here.
Davis,
Here.
Our first item of business tonight is public comment. Is there any member of the public who would like to comment now on an item not on our agenda tonight? Seeing none, we will proceed with our regular agenda. We have two public presentations on the agenda this evening. The first is for a preliminary development plan for Swig Soda Shop at 5959 Barkley Street. Mr. Scott, will you please make your presentation?
Hey, thank you, Mayor. It's just throwing me off a little bit that you're running the meeting.
Substitute chair.
Okay, so the Planning Commission heard a preliminary development plan application for Swig Soda Shop to be located at 5959 Barkley Street. And that would be the northeast corner of Barkley and Martway, which is the site of the old Backyard Burger. It's been kind of home of a pop-up nursery for the last decade or so. So really this is just kind of Swig is the name of the company that's proposing the development. And their concept is what's called dirty sodas. And it's just basically flavor type sodas of all sorts and desires. And then I think pretzels and cookies. So really no food, just primarily drinks. And it's primarily drive-through. So it's just a small building, about 600 square feet with a drive-through sales window. And it's similar in concept to a lot of type of developments that are coming into the area, such as Dutch Brothers and Seven Brew. Fortunately, it seems to be kind of the wave of the future with retail, especially restaurants, as it's more of a drive-through as opposed to an actual walk-in, sit-down type of establishment. What we did ask them to do, obviously this is within the form-based code district, but this development obviously would not normally comply with the form-based code. So to that extent, we asked them to try to meet as many elements of the form-based code as they could. And the big element was not to put the building in the middle of a lot surrounded by a drive-through lane. Try to move the building to the front of the street, preferably Barkley, have some kind of presence on the street. So they did that. They actually took our comments to heart and proposed that type of development. So what's being proposed is a development that sits on the sidewalk along Barkley with a small patio area out front, and actually a walk-up window. So a pedestrian or somebody on a bicycle could actually go there and walk up to the window and order a drink and then sit at a table or a bench and enjoy that. And then the parking would actually be internal to the site. And there's, as you'll recall, with that particular parcel of property, there's two entrances right now. One is kind of close to Martway in the south, and there's a north entrance. That south entrance is actually not very good access management. It's kind of dangerous. So we asked them to close that and just use the north entrance, which they're doing. And that kind of forces the circulation of the cars to go into the site to the east and kind of circle around. And then come back to kind of the west side where the window's at and they can make their order. Then they're also proposing to kind of use that interior space as something of a small park, and they're going to have another little set of tables there, basically where that gazebo sits now. And then we'll be offering lots of landscaping on site. And then they're actually proposing to provide an EV charging station, as well as, this was just kind of a off the cuff suggestion on part of staff, but having no idle signs for their drive-through. So maybe try to get some folks to turn off their car while they're waiting for their soda. So this was submitted to the Planning Commission last Monday, and after taking testimony from the public and comments from staff and the developer, the Planning Commission approved it for recommendation to the City Council 6-0. So.
All right, do we have any questions or comments from the committee for Brian?
I have a question.
Yes, Ken?
Was there any discussion about traffic flow, both into and out of the drive-through area, but I was looking at within the area, if someone gets stuck, they can't really get out of there because it seems like it's a single lane file.
Which is probably true with most drive-throughs. You get to a point of no return with the drive-through. You're just kind of going through it until you can get out. But they do provide a turnaround. And it's on the north side of the property.
Okay,
So there's kind of an opportunity for someone to sort of drive through like, oh, this line looks awfully long. I don't have time. Maybe I'll just turn around and go back and try another time.
okay.
So there is an opportunity.
Was there
for
any
that.
other discussion about traffic
No.
flow?
No. So.
Okay,
And we did ask them to provide a trip generation report. And really the expected number of trips to and from are pretty minimal. So it wouldn't be something to have a huge impact on the traffic in the area.
okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right,
Yeah, no questions. I wanted to say not a big fan of the fact that this is primarily a drive-through oriented development, but we can get into further discussion at the governing body meeting.
yeah, and Brian, the site size here is it 0.71 acres?
Correct.
Small site.
Yeah, it's 0.7 acres. A form-based code would recommend a two-story building on that site. Anything that's a half an acre or larger, the form-based code would like to see a two-story building or taller. I've gotten lots of phone calls over the years from folks that are interested in that particular parcel. And when I explain that to them, I hear a click, a dial tone. Because a two-story building just doesn't work on that site by the time you factor in the size of the building, accommodations for an elevator, then the parking, and it just doesn't pencil out.
Okay. Any other questions for Brian? Yeah, Kristen? Oh, Mike.
Saw green. I just read an article yesterday extensively about how some city councils are actually deviating kind of what Ben was suggesting from just having a drive-through type of establishments because of the traffic flow and how it doesn't encourage pedestrian flow, that type of thing. And I mean, I'm not going to be on the council much longer, but it just seems to be contradictory to where we are wanting to go in regards to a pedestrian friendly, community.
Right.
So that's the only comment. I
Yeah,
have to
and
make.
that's all true. And, we try to explain that to the development community when they come to us with projects, especially in the form-based code district, the intent of the form-based code. But the staff were kind of struck with this balancing act of this is what the form-based code wants, but yet this is what the market's bringing to us. And as I stated earlier, we're seeing more and more fast food type restaurants that are going strictly to the drive-through. They're not even doing a walk in, sit down and have a meal type of concept anymore. And I'm not unique to us. I'm seeing that in other cities as well. So I don't know if it's something with COVID or just a sign of the times. I don't know. But people love their cars, unfortunately, so.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brian. Our second presentation for the evening is a preliminary development plan for Waterworks Park located at 5814 West 53rd Street, also with Brian.
Okay, Mr. Almany came to the Planning Commission meeting last Monday evening and presented with his architectural team, the concept for improvements at Waterworks Park, which is generally located at 5814 West 53rd Street. I won't go into great detail. These plans didn't really deviate much from what he presented to the city council recently at a meeting. There was some neighbors that were present at the public hearing. A lot of the questions kind of revolved around what will the hours of the park be? Will there be any kind of curfew or anything in terms of when the park closes in the evening? Will the parking lot be gated? When will the construction start? Those are some of the primary questions. I think Mr. Almany did a very good job of kind of addressing all of those. You know, yes, we will have hours of open and closing of the park. The restrooms will be locked in the evening. You know, there won't be a gate on the parking lot. So a lot of those questions I think were addressed to the satisfaction of the residents that were there. And then it wasn't really too much about the design or improvements from the planning commission at all. So after taking all the public testimony, they recommended approval 6-0 to the city council. So these two items will be on your regular session for planning commission action in 2 weeks.
Okay. Do we have any questions for Brian about this item? Yes, Hillary.
Just a quick question. We'll have the minutes from the planning commission by
Yes.
that time. Okay, cool. Thanks.
We hope our transcriptionist is bailing on us. She's taking another job, so we're trying to find another transcriptionist, but she said she would do this meeting for us, so.
All right, seeing no, oh yeah, Laura.
We'll have the minutes, but I think in speaking with Penn and he could chime in, but I believe he had an opportunity to speak with those residents for quite some time after the meeting as well. Many of them are immediately adjacent to the park. And so I'm sure he would be happy to fill in any questions once you have a chance to look at the minutes or share that information.
Great, thank you. All right, we will now move into our action items. Our first action item this evening is the acceptance of the meeting minutes from Robin Folks.
Thank you. Meeting minutes from the June 7th, 2023 Community Development Committee are included in for review and acceptance in your packet tonight.
All right, do we have a recommendation?
Recommend acceptance, consent.
Everyone good with that? All right, thank you. Next, we will consider a design agreement for Row Avenue from Johnson Drive to 63rd Street, a 2024 CARS project from Celia Durant.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. The Row Johnson Drive to 63rd project is in the city's 5-year CIP, and it's our 2024 CARS project. The scope of work includes a 2-inch mill and overlay, a new sidewalk on the east side of Row between Johnson Drive and 59th Street, a spot sidewalk and curb replacement, a retaining wall, stormwater repairs, the traffic signal buyout and replacement at the intersection of Johnson Drive and Row, and pavement markings. The attached design agreement with Olson includes all design phase services, bid and construction phase services as well, in an amount not to exceed $105,657. The project would be administered by the city of Mission, and it's a joint project with the cities of Fairway, Roland Park, and Prairie Village. And the design and construction costs will be split between all the cities based on the proportion of construction in their area. And I would be happy to answer any questions you have.
Any questions for Celia? Seeing none, do we have a recommendation?
Recommend we take this to council. I don't know if you want to do non-consent.
Everyone good with that? Okay. Thank you, Celia.
Thank you.
And next, we will consider items 5 and 6, which are a stormwater system inspection project agreement and interlocal agreement with Johnson County, also with Celia.
So first of all, I I want to point out a typo that I noticed, which I'd rather not point it out, but I found it. So in the recommendation, it has the old number 179,962, but in the body and in the agreement, the appropriate amount is $175,536. So I wanted to point that out, and we'll make sure it's changed for the council meeting. So I apologize about that. So what? Yes.
Saved
That
us
makes
some-
you feel like it's really doesn't cost as much, saving $4,000. So the Johnson County Stormwater Management Program provides up to 50% matching funds for inspection of corrugated metal pipe with an estimated risk of 3.2 or higher, based on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being a new pipe and 5 being of close to failure pipe. And so in 2020, we received our first grant from Johnson County, and we used BHC Roads to do that inspection. And during that time, we used their scope of services. They recommended to try to, they thought that we could get still the quality inspection services, but save a little money by doing a pipe camera for shorter pipe lengths, and then using the crawler camera for the pipes exceeding 150 linear feet. And we thought that was good, but then this year we've started to see some of our pipes that were rated higher not quite as accurate. So we had already submitted an application to Johnson County for 2022 using that technology. And since that, we've decided we need to go back and inspect every single foot of pipe. And so we talked to Trek Design Group, and they're one of the only, well, I shouldn't say one of the only ones, but one of the well-known and consulting groups that actually owns their own camera. BHC had to sub out that part of it. And so they recommended using it for, all pipe runs. And so based on that, they would inspect for a total project cost of $175,536, and Johnson County would share 50% of that. And so we're recommending that if you approve this agreement, then our second step, which is in the next agenda item, would be to approve the interlocal between Johnson County and the city of Mission. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Celia on either part? Seeing none, what's the recommendation on each?
Recommend that we go forward, non-consent on this one.
With that?
And if you want to do the second one, that's fine.
Yeah, both non-consent.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Celia.
Thank you.
Our next item. Our next item is for consideration of a sponsor agreement for the Planning Sustainable Places Citywide Bike Ped Connection Study from Brian Scott.
So last year we made an application for a Planning Sustainables grant through the Mid-America Regional Council of Governments, MARC, to do a study on the Rock Creek Trail from roughly Woodson to Roland Drive. And we received the grant. We were awarded those funds. When all the grant recipients made application and received their grants, there was money left over for the Kansas side. So they kind of took that pot of money and solicited applications for new grants in 2023. So we decided we'd take a stab at that. And this time we submitted an application for a kind of bike ped trail connection study throughout the city. And we were actually awarded that grant. We had received the top score through that solicitation process. So very proud of that. Now, that was a study that we had initially budgeted in the 2023 budget for, I think, $20,000. Our match is going to be $15,000. And then the grant itself will be, the total will be $53,000 will be the grant. So the total will be $68,000 to do the study. And we have actually gone ahead, Mark has gone ahead and solicited proposals. We've received 2 proposals that we're scoring this week. So this agreement will be the agreement with Mark to administer the grant for us. So,
Great. Any questions for Brian? Do we have a recommendation?
Recommend that we take this consent.
Everyone good with that? And thanks, Brian, and thanks to Carrie too for the great work on the application. All right, next we will consider flooring replacement for the conference space in the Powell Community Center with Penn Almany.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So we have a conference center at the Powell Community Center, as most of you know, and it's room C, D, and E. We last installed carpet there in December 2015, and it's ending its useful life. We have a lot of rental groups, birthday parties, marriages, bar mitzvahs, you name it. There's a lot of wear and tear, a lot of cleaning that goes on in between. And based on the last iteration replacement, we decided to go with 1 foot by 3 foot replacement sections, which have served us well. If there's a stain that we just couldn't get out, you could just pull out a couple of those pieces and get a little bit more use from the overall space. But as we move forward, some of the pains we felt is from one rental prep to the next, and people expecting a clean, usable facility and having, unfortunately, the rental previous to them with a stain that you just don't have the time to remove properly has caused some concerns that urged us to look at alternative solutions moving forward for that space. So we landed on 2 primarily. One was an epoxy flooring, which many rental facilities in the region utilize. The other was a polished concrete, which is kind of universally used in large spaces for large gatherings of people. So we took several objectives when we were reviewing those elements, one of which was how would it look? How would it wear? Is it safe? Is it easy to care for? Would it maximize the usable space? You know, all of the various uses. What would be the impact to patrons in terms of replacement? And then what's the standard for rental space flooring? So we looked at each of those objectives when we were reviewing options, and visited several rental facilities in the region, most of whom had a lot of glowing recommendations for both epoxy and polished concrete. One of the feedbacks that we got from a couple of the vendors that stood out to us in particular was epoxy gets damaged a little bit quicker, at which point you've got to take time annually to replace that or put a new layer on top of, whereas concrete can be repolished and fixed to some extent throughout the year without taking away time from patron use. So it's a little bit more resilient. We reached out to 8 vendors who install polished concrete in particular, 4 of whom responded. Big Red Decorative, whose primary business is installing polished concrete. Epoxy Floors by Welch, who does both. Hardacre Construction and Mid-America Concrete Service. Hardacre Construction was the lowest bidder, but they didn't include any wood trim replacement or staining element and lacked some costing details. Big Red Decorative Concrete was the next lowest bid and had a more responsive bid, included each phase of the project, reusing the existing wood trim and steps where possible to save us money. They also have extensive experience in the region. One of their projects most recently was at Union Station in Casen, as well as several regional hotels. They provide care instructions and claim to have the industry's best polished system, which I'm sure each business would claim to, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they, one thing that stood out to us was they walked through the project with PCC personnel and before turning it over to us and answer any questions and kind of give you an owner's manual type deliverable, which is very helpful for us. So they anticipate a 5-day window. They book up relatively quickly, and as such, we'd have to reserve with them as soon as possible. They claim a 15-year warranty on the system and a 2-year warranty on their workmanship. Staff recommends the project be awarded to Big Red Decorative Concrete for the conference room polished concrete for $32,132.10, with an anticipated installation to occur the last 2 weeks of August, which coincides with our annual maintenance period. And that'll be funded by Parks and Recreation sales tax funds. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Right, any questions for Penn? Yeah, Ken?
Penn, with this move away from carpet, it's going to affect the acoustics of that conference room quite a bit, a lot of echoing. Is there any thought about how to address that?
Yes, so there's plenty of paneling options out there. Some are easier to install than others. And the step we decided to take was to hold off on installing any of that acoustic dampening element until we found out just how far-reaching that a problem would be. We have noticed that from when we went from carpet to vinyl in A and B in particular. But because it's just two spaces, it's a little bit more manageable. So we anticipate having to go in afterward with all three rooms.
Or did you have something to
Yeah,
add?
and I would say as well, this creates some flexibility in that space, which is one of the things that will be front and center in the feasibility study recommendations. And so I think if I know they toured facilities, but if you think about close to us, Merriam's Community Center, if you've been in their sort of conference or event rooms, or the Johnson County Arts and Heritage Museum, you're seeing that. And so there are a lot of facilities who have the experience now as well with sort of the dampening and the management of that. But I think, what's the impact, and then what's the impact based on how those spaces will be programmed going forward will influence those decisions about controlling the noise.
And Emily, do we have a question online?
Councilmember Chociej, did you want to?
Yes. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, looking for the unmute button here. Yeah, I think I like this option overall. My two main concerns are, looks like there's a grinding and prep phase. So I'm just wondering if the contractors are including a pretty good degree of dust control and separation, and what the impact to the rest of the facility is going to be, as well as if we know anything about the condition of the underlying concrete, if it is even, looks good enough to polish up, or does it have big patches and cracks and things like that? Thanks, Penn.
You bet. So the first answer is they will tape up some plastic over each doorway, window, essentially every section of the wall, to prevent that dust from escaping into the overall community center. That's especially helpful because we don't want that going through our HVAC system and kind of spreading everywhere. So that'll be shut down. The nice thing is we can control the airflow from that space, and it's coinciding with the overall community center shutdown. So we won't have too many negative impacts due to that. The other question was the concrete underneath the carpet. Based off of staff recollections, it's in good condition. So I wasn't here at that time. We pulled up certain sections that I've seen and replaced. Concrete in those areas looked good. So I would assume the rest does. Usually any kind of shifting or cracking happens along walkways and high use impact areas, which is where the the carpet was replaced, and I didn't notice anything in the last two replacements. So I'm pretty confident that we will avoid any major issues there.
That sounds good. Yeah, I do wonder if we find cracks or anything that have to be filled. I'm not familiar with how well this process can sort of polish and buff and hide those. So hopefully it's in good condition, but I'm glad that we believe it to be. So that's a good starting point.
Yeah, every concrete installer in the world will tell you cracks are part of the character of concrete. And so we need to expect cracks. And that's part of the polish system is you can smooth out all those transitions and make them safe so that they don't become hazards. But that's part of the the character, unique quality. It's even sections, you'll notice the different pores that area was in because the concrete will be a little bit different color.
Hillary, did you have a question?
Or just a comment.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just gonna share that I think aesthetically, it's gonna change the general look and feel of that space. And I would just, I'm sure this is part of the feasibility plan, but I would just encourage us to consider what other, modest upgrades the space may need to make sure that it feels like something that folks want to, rent for a wedding or, because oftentimes I feel like the polished concrete look is more of a like modern, lofty kind of feel to it. And I can't visualize the space in the moment, but just thinking about how that connects with the other elements of the room. I'm sure that's on your radar, but just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Do we have a recommendation?
Recommend we take this to council on consent.
Good with that? All right. Thank you, Penn. And we've got you next up as well for the construction contract for the Broadmoor Trail construction project.
So you'll recall in 2019, we contracted with Confluence to begin a master planning process for our 5 major city parks. Improvements to Broadmoor Park Trail have been a longstanding priority, especially for the Park Recreation and Tree Commission, and no doubt any neighbor who utilizes that trail frequently. As part of that process, we estimated that renovations for the park improvements would total about $2 million. And you'll know we moved forward on Mohawk Park, Phase 1, Waterworks Park. So jumping into Broadmoor Park Trail enhancement was part of just an overall plan for us to make sure that each park within Mission felt renovated, rejuvenated, and safe for all patron use. So this is following through on that plan. It was planned as a project for 2023. And part of this project includes a 10-foot concrete perimeter trail, 88 trail access points, as well as all the grading necessary to make those transitions accessible to all individuals. Future phased improvements will include a new baseball/softball field, as well as seating, restrooms, pavilion shelter, playground equipment, board-in-place rubber surfacing, shade sails, a multi-purpose court for pickleball and/or basketball, native plantings, and more tree diversity within the park. In May 2023, GBA completed the survey and design, as well as a revised engineer's cost estimate, which came out to over our budgeted amount of $190,000. Their estimate came in at $379,571. So once we got that estimate, we were pretty concerned about reaching our ability to finance the entire trail resurfacing. So we proposed the project in 2 pieces, a base bid and then an option for a bid alternate. The base bid was from the northeast entrance down to the southeast bridge crossing. And then the bid alternate was from that bridge all the way connecting the entire perimeter trail back to that northeast entrance. So we pushed the bid out on website as well as other areas, had a pre-bid meeting. 2 vendors showed up. They asked a couple questions. I updated an addendum online for all vendors who were interested. And then on June 15th, we had four contractors submit a bid. And in order of lowest to highest cost was Gunter Construction. For both pieces, it was $306,935. PCC, not to be confused with the Powell Community Center, for $378,531. Kansas Heavy Construction, $402,541, and then Freeman Concrete, $798,185.70. So big spread in terms of contractor bids. Based on a review and evaluation, staff recommends approval of the contract with Gunter Construction for trail improvements. both the base bid as well as the bid alternate to ensure that the transitions, the grading, all done at the same time. And we can hang our hat on another phased improvement completion. Construction is anticipated to begin September of this year. And Gunter Construction estimates it would take them about 90 days. So that would push them to roughly January 2024. This project was funded or was approved for completion this year and is funded by Parks and Recreation and Sales Tax funds. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, Mary?
Probably like difficult to speculate, but any idea why there's such a large gap between the lowest and the highest bid?
You're right, it is difficult to speculate, but I was reviewing with one of our contractors and they were pretty candid in saying whenever they don't have the time to just sit down and do the legwork and plan it out and get appropriate estimates from other subcontractors, they'll put a number out there that's highly inflated just so that they won't lose their shirt. And so their guess was that's what happened here.
I'll add that I think I recall Gunter doing some work in the city, and I think they're familiar with some of our staff and procedures, and they've done big projects. So I think they have lots of equipment and they're ready to rock on a lot of things.
Ken, did you have a question?
Yeah, Penn, what impact will it have to do then the next phase in terms of any possible damage to the trail at that time?
Are you talking about the entire trail?
Well, just maybe portions of the trail, but you're gonna have machinery and things like that, I believe, come in and cross the trail. What's the impact on that and how are we going to mitigate damage to a trail that we've installed?
Yeah, so that was part of the consideration of doing the base bid as well as the bid alternate, was they could come in and then if there were any adverse impacts to that base bid, and any damage that occurred in the parts they didn't touch, they could remediate that as part of the overall project. But I believe what you're asking is how will the grading be impacted by all of the construction work happening around the entire park, right? And that's part of their bid. They go in, they do the pre-grade, prep it for concrete, and then come in and do the final grading. So all of those areas, the depressions, the disturbed earth, all of that will be graded seamlessly with the surrounding areas.
I also think that you may recall that the parking lot was left in its original location. So the other improvements that are included in the overall conceptual plan for Broadmoor, I think the access by leaving that parking lot the same mitigates the need to cross the trail or very limited opportunities. And so I know that overall conceptual plan was front and center as they worked with GBA to design the trail and make sure that that trail layout sort of aligns with the future plan.
Penn, do you have a sense of why the construction timeline is so long and how will that impact availability of the park?
I believe that was their effort in keeping their costs as low as possible. So sometimes contractors have multiple projects running simultaneously and there's a premium for getting it done quickly. As you'll notice, the one contractor estimated that it would only take them 40 days, but by spreading it out, you can move your little contracting groups around and save some money that way.
Got it. Yeah, Kristen? Microphone on, great.
I think so. I use that park all the time, so I'm super excited that it's going to be done in one phase as opposed to two, and it's going to be 10 foot. And I appreciate all the help that and all the work that you all have done to get that taken care of for me
Yeah.
and the rest of our
Just for
residents.
Kristen.
You bet, Kristen. We're excited too.
Yeah, Hillary?
Yeah, second to Kristen. It's great and great work on this, and that's exciting. I did just have a quick question. I can't remember on the phasing when the bathrooms are planned to be updated at that park, because I know that they're definitely in need as well.
Yes, they are. I can't recall the phasing either. I believe it's in 2 years, if I'm not mistaken. we'll touch on that as part of the CIP.
Thank you.
You bet.
Okay, do we have a recommendation on this one?
I don't have any in front of me.
I recommend that we take this to council on consent, no, non-consent.
Non-consent, okay. Thank you, Penn. And I believe you are next up for our last action item as well, which is a contract for wood staining in the North Breezeway of the Powell Community Center.
Thank you. So North Breezeway, both the southern and northern Breezeway are beautiful character qualities of our community center, and just UV damage, heat, wind and rain have kind of depleted that look on the northern side. We were able to take care of that on the southern side a couple years ago. So we're hoping to bring that renewed life back to the northern edge. The last time it was done was 10 years ago. And they recommend that you restain every 2 to 3 years. We have that beginning next year, every 3 years in perpetuity as part of our maintenance plan. So we're taking care of this so that it won't be an option. This is one of the last outstanding deferred maintenance elements that we're kind of buttoning up, which is exciting. We did reach out to 3 different vendors, 2 of whom responded and 1 was non-responsive. Jeremy's Trim and Remodeling bid $10,830, and Distinctive Quality Painting bid $20,979. Distinctive Quality, just for reference, did the South Breezeway, so they're familiar with some of the costs associated with it. Jeremy's Trim did not, so they asked that we would include $3,000 because they just estimate that some pieces of wood would kind of soak in the stain more than others, and so that's kind of a buffer for them to meet the standard that we want looking forward. So they do warranty their work for 1 year. And based off of the budgeted amount of $20,000, that would save us $6,170. So we're recommending contracting with Jeremy's Trim and Remodeling for $13,830 to be funded by Parks and Recreation sales tax funds.
Any questions for Penn on this one? Seeing none, I would entertain a recommendation.
Recommend we take this to consent.
All righty, thank you, Penn.
Thank you.
So that concludes our action items. We do not have any discussion items this evening for CDC. So Laura, are there any department updates for the Community Development Committee?
Do you have any updates?
Yes, we got Mission Summer Family Picnic this Saturday, 6 p.m. So we're anticipating good weather. If we do have inclement weather, we'll call it on site. Got that question earlier today. And one of the things that we're starting for brand new for 2023 is a laser light show. We're excited for the possibilities and excited that we don't have to worry about fireworks and kind of the blowback of some of those elements. But Surfing USA is going to be a tribute band for all Beach Boy music. And so we'll have a good time, free food and drinks, opportunity to purchase drinks, as well as to purchase dessert. So a couple food options on site.
Do we have any reconfiguration of the food lines from last year?
Yes, we always reconfigure, but I think we're looking at 2 different access points this
Okay,
time
great.
around.
It is, you do get to chat with people. It's true. Yeah, Ken?
Do we have any update on the Outlook situation? Yes.
So our contractor's out working on it right now. Water One agreed to reimburse us for the project since they didn't really have the capabilities to do it themselves. The walls of the of the concrete blocks we're using is as high as it's gonna be stacked now, and then it's gonna be a 2-to-1 slope, so they should have the backfill and start rip wrapping it tomorrow. So by the end of the week, the wall should be complete and kind of out of the danger zone, and then they'll have their fence contractor come back in and put fence back around it. So one side note, they got to dig up that road again to do another 10 foot of main replacement from some of their inspection work. So it'll be back out there probably within the next week or two. Do another part of that 20-inch main that blew up over there, fixing it so that doesn't happen again. But we're out of the danger zone now, so it should be fixed by the end of the week for sure.
And kudos to Brent because Water One originally said it was going to be on our dime and he didn't take that as the final answer. So
Good job, Brent.
appreciate
Good
that.
job. Good job.
And then we have had some calls from some residents in the apartments and some other folks who had some damage, and we've been able to connect them with the insurance folks at Water One for that.
Thank you for the update.
Great. All right. It is now 7:15 PM, and with no further discussion, that concludes the meeting of the Community Development Committee. Again, this video will be made public on our website at missionks.org. Thank you.
Okay, does anybody want to take a break before we hunker down for a while, or do we just want to roll into it? Okay. Okay, I'll start. Yeah. Alrighty, it is now 7:16 PM, and I'd like to call this meeting of the Finance and Administration Committee to order. While this meeting is being held in person, we are also offering the option for the public to participate through Zoom if preferred. Instructions on how to attend virtually are included in the City Council calendar item listed on the front page of missionks.org. The public is also invited to participate in the meeting. If you are participating through Zoom, please either add your comment in the chat feature and it will be read out loud, or note that you would like to speak and we will call on you shortly to make your comment verbally. Please remember your comments or questions are visible to everyone in the meeting. If you are a part of our in-person group tonight, please raise your hand, but stay seated and we will call on you to go to the lectern to make your comment. When you make your comment, please state your name and city of residence for the record. Also, please be conscientious of others trying to speak and speak slowly and clearly. This meeting will be recorded and posted on the city's website at missionks.org. Please contact the administration offices at 913-676-8350 with any questions or concerns. Ms. Folks, please call the roll.
Thomas. Woltinghouse.
Here.
Loudon.
Here.
Ryard.
Here.
Inman.
Here.
Chociej.
Here.
Davis.
Here.
Our first item of business is public comment. Is there any member of the public who would like to comment now? Seeing none in the audience. Okay, no, moving on. We have no public presentations this evening. Therefore, we will now proceed with our regular agenda. Our first action item this evening is the acceptance of the meeting minutes from Robin Folks.
Thank you. Draft minutes of the June 7th, 2023 Finance and Administration Committee meeting are included for review and acceptance in your packet tonight.
Recommend acceptance.
Everybody
Consent.
get that? Great. Our second action item is consideration of a waiver section 600.040B of Missions Municipal Code for the Millhaven HOA picnic, also from Robin Folks.
Thank you. Millhaven Homeowners Association has once again submitted a special events permit to host their annual association picnic at Mohawk Park. This year it'll be held on September 23rd from 4 o'clock to 10 o'clock PM. The picnic includes games, a band, and residents are encouraged to bring their own food and drink. They are asking for a waiver of section 600.040 of the municipal code to allow them to bring their own alcohol to consume on public property. No alcohol will be sold. It is purely to be brought by residents for their own consumption.
Okay, any questions or comments from the committee?
Recommend that we take it to consent.
Thank you. Thank you, Robin. Our next action item is consideration of a resolution updating bank signatories from Emily Randall.
I'm starting with the best part first. I would like to introduce Christine Korth. She is our new budget and finance manager. Her first day is today, and we were so excited to see her face in the morning. And so she joins our team. I don't know if you want to say a couple words or no.
I'm just really excited to be here and I thank you for the opportunity.
So we're just, oh yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, feel free. You want to join?
So I do live in Gardner, Edgerton. We live out in the county. We have a couple of acres out there. I have been commuting to and from Leavenworth, Kansas. I was working at the Leavenworth School District as the Director of Finance and Reports. And before that, I spent 7 to 8 years at a private federal detention center as the business administrator.
We're thrilled. The transition is underway and
Yes.
we're very excited. So thank you.
Yes,
I'll
thanks.
continue.
Thank you.
So again, as part of the transition, Brian is offloading as fast as he possibly can, which is well-deserved. And so he, again, very generously prepared these two items that you see and put my name on the top of them, which I appreciate. But we are just doing cleanup for bank signatories. We do our banking activity, as you know, with Security Bank, and just time to time wanted to update the signing authority for those 4 accounts that we have. So that's the resolution that you see before you for item number 3. I guess we could pause there or continue.
Any questions, comments?
Just go ahead and make recommendation that we take this to consent.
Thank you.
All right, and then our next action item is consideration of a resolution updating authorized users in the Kansas Municipal Investment Pool, also from Emily.
Yes, so you'll see item number 4, we have our Kansas Municipal Investment Pool for funds over $2 million that we use. We're just updating the signatures for that account as well, authorized users for those.
Okay, any questions, comments?
Likewise, I recommend consent.
Any other? Okay. All right, our 5th action item is consideration of a contract, thank you, Emily, with All City Management Services Incorporated for crossing guard services.
Good evening. It's that time of year where we need to shore up our crossing guards for the upcoming school year. This year, we only need the one for Highlands, but the price increase was significant that it still looks close to what we were paying for 2. That's been an issue that all of the other municipalities have been dealing with and trying to find some other resolutions to, but given that school starts next month, we need to make sure we have something in place to take care of that while we research other options. So staff recommends approving contract with All City Management Services. The cost, annual cost of approximately $15,300.
Any questions or comments?
Recommend we take it to consent also.
Okay. Can't believe next month's already August. All right, our next action item is for consideration of tax abatement policy from Laura Smith.
Yes, thank you. So back at the end of May, we had a work session on a new tax abatement policy. We have a policy, Council Policy 116 currently, but it's been in place for quite a few years, and we've never actually had anyone approach the city asking for a consideration for a property tax abatement until this last year. And as we took a look at that, and as we sought to sort of reconcile the goals and objectives that the council has expressed, as we've listened to some of the presentations from the developers who have requested consideration of the tax abatement, we wanted to make sure that we had a policy that provided some better parameters and guidance in that. So we had that work session, kind of walked through not only the IRB process, familiarized ourselves all a little bit more with that, but then looked at this draft policy. So the policy included in your packet is reflective of sort of the conversations and the consensus coming out of that May 31st work session. A couple of adjustments as the mayor caught on page 2 of the policy in section 4, big A, little a. I think we wanted to include a capital of an investment between 10 million and 24.99999 million to receive the adjustment. So it wasn't just that minimum 3 million that it sort of took to get your foot in the door. And then also we just updated section 7C to be reflective of the $2,500 in application costs that are consistent with the IRB application fee in the current policy. So I'd be happy to answer any questions. I know that we have shared the draft policy from the work session with at least one of the developers. Have not had feedback from them yet, but we wanted to make sure that they could see that and kind of see at least the direction the council was contemplating should they want to make any adjustments to their request.
All right, what questions are coming? None? Anything online? No? Okay. All right.
I would recommend that we take this to council non-consent.
I agree.
And I appreciate all the work that was done on this. I
Thanks.
find that it really strengthens that policy and makes sure that our city is better protected.
Well, thank you. And I think we've had some conversations. I know we've talked about not wanting to slow down and hold up the introduction of this policy since we sort of have two interested applicants in the pipeline, if you will. But I think this policy and the work that we've done on this policy also provides a good springboard for some revisions we've talked about making to both our TIF and CID policies for the last several years. And always nice to sort of do that in the absence of an active project. So get this in place, move forward with the negotiations with these two developers, and then set our sights on strengthening the other incentive policies that we have.
All right. And our next three action items relate to the consideration of resolutions for the intent to levy property tax exceeding the revenue neutral rate for the city of Mission, Rock Creek Drainage District number 1, and Rock Creek Drainage District number 2, also from Laura.
Yes, thank you. And so I'm going to touch briefly on these, and then I expect that we will circle back after we've kind of been through our budget discussion as well. But I think everyone's familiar that for the last several years with the introduction of the revenue neutral rate as a part of our annual tax rate calculations, we have to now formally, this will be the second full year where we have to provide formal notice to the county by July 20th of each year so that they can then send out a specific notice to each parcel in our jurisdiction relative to what the upper lid of a mill levy for that current year would be. Last year, you may recall that the timing of our meeting dates and the July 20th deadline didn't coincide well, so we had a special meeting at which we considered the resolution of intent to exceed revenue neutral. The council made the decision to exceed the revenue neutral rate. And revenue neutral, I think you're all familiar with, is essentially you set the mill levy at a rate that generates exactly the same amount of revenue from property taxes as it did the prior year. So in its simplest form, you're sort of paying for this year's goods and services with the same amount that you paid for last year's goods and services with. So this year, the dates align a little bit better. Our legislative meeting is on the 19th. And so these drafts or these resolutions of intent will move forward as action items on the July 19th agenda. Right now, the maximum mill levy or the proposed mill levy is left blank. And that's as we go through the budget discussion here in just a few minutes, we'll circle back and look for some consensus on what to include there when we publish. So there's no public hearing required on that. This is just the resolution of the intent to exceed revenue neutral. And then you set a cap, you can come down from there following the public hearing as a part of the process. You just can't go up from whatever is published in these resolutions. And so it's really just three resolutions because we have three separate taxing entities. City, Rock Creek Drainage District number 1, Rock Creek Drainage District number 2. So unless there's any questions about the process, I think we could hold there and then come back following our budget discussion.
Any questions, comments?
So are you wanting us to go ahead and make recommendation on this?
No, not until after we get through the budget
Okay.
conversation here, just our discussion item. But yes, then I think we would be looking for consensus. Obviously, this will be on a regular agenda on the 19th, so there would be an opportunity to modify that, but the more we can communicate upfront, I think the better.
Okay. And we have one discussion item tonight regarding the 2023 revised and 2024 budget general fund budget, as well as review of the other non-CIP funds in the city's budget. Ms. Smith, will you please begin your presentation?
Yes, thank you. At your place, Emily, if you would pull up the presentation on the screen. You have a copy of the PowerPoint presentation that we'll be walking through. Had one memo that came primarily focused on the general fund. And then at your place is a second memo, which sort of deals with several of the other ancillary funds that make up our overall City of Mission budget. We did the CIP in concept several weeks ago. So now we turn our attention this evening to the general fund. And again, we'll touch briefly. So you've got those materials along with a list of supplementals. So we'll kind of step through this presentation. Please feel free to stop me at any point. So we'll kind of recap priorities, goals, and objectives of the council as we start this. We'll talk about the key performance areas that were established last year and that we've committed to sort of tying back our budget and policy decisions to each year. We'll talk about how the budget has come together so far in terms of general fund revenues and expenses, the supplemental requests, the impacts that that has on our general fund reserves, highlights from the other funds, remaining steps in the budget process, and then sort of questions and discussion. I sat down and figured out the other day, this is my 19th budget with the City of Mission. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I know this budget inside and out. I think that some years the move to budget recommendations is much easier than others. I will tell you this is one of the most challenging that I think we've encountered in quite some time. Not all doom and gloom, but I think we have some work and I think we have some long-term decisions and things to think about as we move forward. So next slide, please. Whenever we start to think about the budget development process and implementation of the budget, we really try to look at that in terms of priorities and goals and objectives that are established. And there are priorities and goals that feed into our annual budget process and our annual budget document and the decisions that we make from a variety of different directions. They come from citizens, the council, our board and commission members, and staff. And you can kind of see this as a chart that we put together last year where I think it really just talks about the pressures and sometimes the competing interests that can come to bear on the budget decisions that we make. You'll see one of the tools that we really rely on for citizens, council, and staff is the direction finder. We did our last direction finder survey in 2021. If we continue on our 4-year schedule, we would look at doing an update to that direction finder survey in 2025. So it's not reflected in an expenditure in the budget that's being discussed and presented. So next slide, please. In 2022, at our governing body retreat, we established 5 key performance areas, which reflected top priorities and objectives. We developed outcome statements collectively for each of the key performance areas. And our goal, as I mentioned before, moving forward is to really be able to tie budget and policy recommendations to those key performance areas. So you'll just see those reflected there. They were also reflected in your budget memo. And then similar to last year, when we get to a final recommended budget, we will make specific connections to those key performance areas and where appropriate to direction finder survey results, trying to just tie back the work that we do on an ongoing basis. Next slide, please. This is a recap of the slide that we looked at when we talked in March of this year about just council priorities and objectives, things coming forward from both a 2022 council retreat and a 2023 council budget survey. We didn't add anything to the list. We didn't take anything off the list in March either, but just wanted to kind of recap that. I think it's very indicative of where we're spending our time and money at this point. You know, council budget priorities, street maintenance, stormwater infrastructure, economic development, acceleration of stormwater and street repairs, large scale park and street investments, mental health co-responder funding, et cetera. So I think that, next slide, please. I think we're on track. We remain on track. It's just how fast are we making progress toward all of those goals? And that's always a function of both money and time. And so sometimes there's money in the budget to accomplish it, and we don't have the staff capacity to get it done in any particular year. So in March, when we talked about the other issues and projects that were requiring time or money, talked about the comprehensive plan update and adoption. We now have that calendared. The feasibility study results are coming forward in August. We've completed the municipal court software implementation, the FCIP improvements and the dashboard monitoring. Park improvements are well underway. We've started at least into the short-term rental policy discussions. We've looked at zoning regulations for tobacco and e-cigarette retailers, looked at incentive requests, new tax abatement policy. We were just talking about automated license plate reader purchase. Been successful in receiving 2 planning sustainable places grants. Been successful in securing $6 million in an STP grant application for Johnson Drive. Still pending a decision on our land and water conservation grant fund and our community funding application for Fox Ridge. And then financial management, zoning code update, energy code review and adoption are things that were there that are still sort of just beyond the horizon, or they're coming at us here in the 3rd and 4th quarters of this year. So the list is long, and we try to stay focused on those things, again, impacted by staffing, time, other projects that walk through the door. But we try to make sure that the work that we're doing, we can connect back to some of those council goals, objectives, and priorities. So next slide, please. So as we start to really look at the general fund each year, we start by building out what we think our revenue will be. On this slide, we've just sort of detailed, and in the memo, we talked about really there are 5 primary revenue streams that support. They make up about 93% of the general fund revenues in at least the initial draft of the 2024 budget. That includes, and no surprises to anybody sitting up there, sales and use taxes, property taxes, parks and recreation revenues, franchise fees, and fines and forfeitures. Those 5 revenues, the total general fund revenues as they stand right now are estimated at about 14.08 million, which is about a 1% increase over our 2023 estimated. So as we look at revenue performance, sales and use tax performance remains pretty consistent. You may recall we had a $300,000 sale use tax refund that occurred in 2022 for receipts that we had spent and received back in 2014 through 2016. So even with that refund, we continue to see modest growth. And we've been very conservative of only about a 1% increase in city sales tax.
Laura?
Yeah.
Sorry, just a quick question. The 1% increase from 2023 estimated is estimated projected, or estimated meaning budget that we budgeted this time last year?
Estimated meaning projected.
Thank you.
And I think, Mary, I think Councilmember Davis had it.
Yeah. My question has to do with the money we had to refund. Did we ever get an answer on that, even though we requested it?
No, we've submitted a variety of open records requests and have not turned up anything specific other than we know the retailers and we know the refund was approved, but we still have questions about why no notice is given to allow us to plan for that. You know, we receive a sales tax distribution and it's got a big hole in it, and then we have to sort of go on the trail. So I don't know how we really prevent it for the future, which is probably.
Yeah, I mean, why is there no accountability at the state level to answer our question?
Have been in that process. We were passed around between a couple of state agencies, and we enlisted the aid of our land use attorney in drafting some open records requests, and it basically has turned up nothing at this point. So I think we have not encountered, in some of just at least casual conversations, we haven't found a lot of other people with similar experience. So we've had kind of just moved on from that. We can certainly ask those questions again, but felt like we were sort of beating our heads against the wall there.
Thank you.
So sales and use tax performance is pretty modest growth. I think that's consistent with what many of our neighboring entities are doing. We continue to see recovery for the community center revenues, and at least the way the budget is presented in the materials you received on Monday, it assumes the mill levy is held the same in 2024 as 2023 at 16.37 mills. We are in process because of some of the staff vacancies and the transition. Brian, I think, as you know, has shouldered the tremendous load in getting us close to the finish line on our annual audit. I think we expect to receive a draft this week. But that has put us, typically, we would be working in those numbers in late April, early May. And so we've done our best to kind of give you here. There could be some adjustments as we receive the draft of the audit this week and look at those, but I think we are pretty close. A little bit of a spoiler alert as we go through this. If you're like me, I always flip to the bottom line and see what happens, and we're upside down right now in the general fund. And that doesn't include any of the supplemental requests from any of the departments. And I say that at the beginning because as we go through this conversation, I think it's time for us to really seriously look at how we correct what is effectively a structural imbalance in our budget. So more on that to come. But I know all of you well enough to know you also turned to the last page and looked at the final number. So next slide, please. Just recapped here, also included in your memo, but kind of sales tax revenues, you'll see here, we break that out into city sales and use taxes, and then the county sales and use taxes that are distributed us based on a specific formula. You'll see actually the change budget to actual for city sales and use taxes was a -3%. We actually made up a little bit of ground. It would have been much larger than that, but we use tax made up some of the ground for the $300,000 that we lost. So you'll see we've been really conservative for 2023 estimated and 2024 proposed. We've been a little bit more aggressive, closer to about a 3% increase in the county sales taxes and use taxes because those continue to perform above our expectations. But I think, obviously we'll be able, if performance improves, we'll be able to make adjustments mid-year next year for any of those things. Let's go to the next slide, please. Property tax revenues. So the top of this slide, you'll see kind of our projected assessed valuation for 2023 tax year, which feeds into the 2024 budget, is estimated at $213,632,383, which is about a $3.8 million increase or 7% increase over our assessed valuation from last year. In the current year, 2023, we saw about 11% increase in our assessed valuation. So the valuation decreased slightly. Last year, as we went through the budget process, we talked about the fact that since 2016, our mill levy has effectively decreased from 18.019 mills to the current mill rate of 16.374. So a total decrease of about 1.645 mills. We talked about that again, as I mentioned briefly last year. But I think it should be more front and center in our conversations this year. Current mill rate 16.374. 1 mill in the current year budget generates about $199,000. In the 2024 budget would generate about $213,000. The table at the bottom of this slide, you'll notice if you just look at budget to estimated on property tax, you'll see a decrease there. And that is reflective of about $150,000 in property tax refunds that were the result of BOTA settlements related to the dark store theory. So between the 2022 budget and the 2023 budget, it's been about $450,000 or more than 2 mills that has been taken away from us with no warning and no recourse. I did not include it in this slide, but in the memo, I just wanted to sort of show the impact of, that mill rate has sort of declined because of some fluctuations in TIF valuations and some reporting, the way things have been reported on state forums. And so each of those years that the mill levy has actually decreased, if we go back and we look at the council decisions and discussions, it was actually a recommendation to maintain the mill levy constant over time. So I didn't do it last year. I went back this year and said, okay, cumulatively, if we'd maintained that mill rate since 2016, how much additional revenue would we have generated? And it's about $1.3 million that by just sort of that gradual decline in the mill that we have potentially sort of lost. So we think about, okay, then what are our options sort of going forward? So next slide, please. In your packet, and again on this slide, we wanted to just sort of illustrate the potential, both revenue generated and the impact to the average property owner if we looked at trying to regain some of those mills that have been lost over time. And so we provided a variety of different scenarios, holding that mill levy constant, which is what the base budget that was provided estimates, increasing by 1 mil, increasing by the 1.645, which is the amount of mill lost, and then looking at just some increases to more specific 8.25 or 8.5 total mills. The cost of the average home appraised value is about $310,000 in this year's budget. And so you can kind of look at if you were to look at changes to the mill levy, what that financial impact would be to the average homeowner in Mission over that period of time. So underneath the pictures on this slide, you'll see kind of a breakdown of the number of, it says number of properties, percent increase for 2024 and total number of properties. So according to the information that we received from the county appraiser back in March of this year, this is sort of how the increased property valuation increases shake out across the 2,969 parcels that are appraised and assessed in our community. So 128 properties, 0% or a decrease. And then you can kind of go down. It gets a little, I think, muddier at the end because all of a sudden they're sort of increasing by, 2 or 3%. And then you get to the end and you lump everybody anywhere between a 10 and a 20% increase into one category. But about 59% of property owners, homeowners in Mission in this next tax year are expected to have a 10% increase or less in their assessed valuation. 20% in that 8 to 10 range. And then, excuse me, only about 21% over that 10%. So I think if we look at then the total tax generated, if we held the mill levy constant, would be right at about 3.5 million. And then, so the second chart on this slide will sort of indicate the difference or the additional revenue that would be generated by the changes in mill levy. So yes.
Can I ask a question? When I was looking on page 66 of the packet, there's a property tax delinquent real estate tax line item. And it showed that, and if you can help me interpret this, from 2021, 2022, 23.
Is that a negative $118,000?
Yeah,
That's the refund. So for whatever reason, the county, when they have pulled back that $150,000, they took it out of our delinquent tax line item. So it's strange in how it gets reported, but that's how it's been reported to us on the distributions from the county.
Okay,
So
thank
we
you.
kind of left.
I wasn't sure what that.
We sort of scratched our heads the first time we got that, and I scratched my head a little bit. I mean, we can change that, but if we want to be able to go back and match up these budget documents with something that comes out of our financial management system, I tried to keep them as
That's
consistent.
fine. Thank you.
So you can see that anywhere from 213,000 to about 454,000 is the difference in additional revenue that might be generated under these different mill levy scenarios.
And Laura, we currently have an estimated $371,000 hole, correct?
Correct. Next slide, please. Parks and Recreation revenues, these are strictly from the Powell Community Center. I think everybody's aware that we've seen incremental growth. I think it's been tremendous work of the staff Feasibility study recommendations are coming forward at your August Community Development Committee meeting, and the current estimates that are reflected here are based on historical data. And they don't reflect any recommendations from that feasibility study at this point. So no rate increases, no estimated return on investment from different programming. So these numbers could change as we go through the next month's discussion. Our goal, as we've talked about, is to return to at least a 70 to 80% cost recovery overall. And part of what you will see next month with the recommendations is a pro forma that projects how long it might take us to get back to that 70 to 80% cost recovery goals. So again, the revenues reflected here do not include any price increases. The last time we've had a fee increase for memberships at the community center was 2020. And so that is something that will be factored into the recommendations from the feasibility study. We were bolstered a little bit. Staff was able to secure a child care aware grant for 2022 and part of 2023. Specifically that covers and offsets some expenses from our summer day camp program. So those revenues are not reflected. They actually get reflected in intergovernmental revenues. It's a little tricky. So we'll bring all of those kind of together to show you self-sufficiency.
Kim had a question.
I know that Celia had mentioned with regards to our other fees that we're going to be looking at those.
Yes.
Are those incorporated?
Those have
in
not,
this?
no. So we've not included any adjustments to any of our other fee schedules. So no adjustments to building permitting fees, plan review fees, right of way, so those things. All the revenues that you see are reflective.
Okay.
I don't think we can count on huge revenue increases from that, but certainly that's incrementally could be impacted.
Thank you.
And then we really have franchise fees in this year's budget moved ahead of some of the other categories. Franchise fees, as you are aware, are 5% of gross receipts on all of the utilities, with the exception of Google Broadband, which we just approved a new franchise agreement with them to go to 2%. Franchise receipts are really impacted by weather, hot summers, cold winters, or vice versa. As well as rate increases from the utilities. I think we saw rate increases in natural gas this last year. I think we're anticipating rate increases in electricity for the future of those have, again, not been sort of added here, but it's remained fairly constant. In addition to the franchise receipts, I think one of the things people don't realize is you also pay sales tax on your utility bills. And so utilities are actually one of our largest sales tax generators, and they are for most communities. And then fines and forfeitures, which are fines that result from traffic enforcement, code enforcement, or any other violation of our municipal ordinances. We've seen those decrease over time. And the chief will tell you, he and I have been in very earnest conversations, and we'll continue those about, we know that traffic enforcement is a priority of the council. In looking at ways that we can address that, but those fee levels are often impacted by staffing, other police activity that may be occurring. We've had some fairly large scale incidents that have required a lot of manpower and pulled folks away. Bless you. And then also just how the cases eventually get adjudicated in our municipal court system. Okay, next slide, please. So then we move on to kind of our general fund expenses. Every year, we don't do zero-based budgeting, but we do go back and look at each line item each year and review that. And we look at and consider all of the options available to us to bring the overall budget into balance. That might include eliminating or combining positions, holding positions vacant for a period of time, delaying the purchase of capital equipment, eliminating or reducing specific budget line items, privatizing or outsourcing services where we think we might have an opportunity to achieve efficiencies or economies of scale. Typically, we budget expenses in 4 categories in the general fund: personnel, contractual services, commodities, and capital. We also have transfers out of the general fund, which contribute to expenses And the transfers included in the 2024 budget include $1.4 million to the CIP fund for street maintenance. That's a portion of the property tax that the council since 2016 has committed to dedicating to street maintenance. It's about 41% of the property tax revenues that are collected. So it's a significant portion. And I think it aligns with the feedback that we've had in the Direction Finder survey and the priorities of staff and council. And then $75,000 to the solid waste utility. You may recall, and if you looked at the budget, general fund summary in 2023, we actually added another $500,000 transfer to streets, $350,000 transfer to parks and market site improvements. I think as we've discussed and you heard it during your CDC committee meeting, we know where a big chunk of the parks money went to get that Broadmoor Trail accomplished. And again, I think we're seeing, I think we're just in somewhat of a unique time, whether that's personnel related expenses, which we'll touch on here, whether that's supply chain issues that continue to impact labor issues. I think, although in the grand scheme of things, it was a small increase, but the fence contractor at the community center whose bid changes, the bids feel like they change every other day. And so being able to build in the time to bid and come back with bids or even build budgets a year ahead of time and estimate what things may be is increasingly challenging. Next slide, please. So the biggest expense in the general fund budget, as you know, is personnel. In the sort of estimated 2024 budget or 2024 budget at this time, I can't call it a recommended budget yet. Budget draft, the personnel costs represent about 62% of the general fund expenditures. Kind of the target that you aim for is somewhere between that 60 to 65%. So we're in that range that would be considered sort of best practice. But the personnel costs alone are sort of outpacing some of the incremental revenue growth that we're seeing. The council has been very generous in the last few years in approving increases for both full and part-time staff with the goal of trying to keep our employees really appropriately aligned with both respect to the external market and internal considerations, but increased competition both from the public and the private sector is going to continue, I think, for the foreseeable future to present challenges for us in recruiting and retaining employees. You'll see just a summary in the chart on this slide. We actually reduced our total number of full-time employees between the 2023 and 2024 budgets by one. That was a record clerk's position in public safety. Emily and the chief and their staffs have been working really, knowing we had a retirement coming up mid-year this year, to look at how we could more effectively sort of consolidate, cross-train, and provide that. So we absolutely evaluate every time we have that position vacancy, whether that's through a retirement or a resignation. We look at, is that the position that we need? And do we need that position? So I think I'm very proud of the organization and the way we've been able to sort of look at that. Contractuals and commodities, I didn't include a slide on that yet. That's still, there's sort of a lot of things in play there, but overall, I think the increase is fairly minimal. Actually, 0% sort of increase in contractual services, 2% increase in commodities. Again, they're being driven by things like fuel costs and just the cost of goods and supply chain. Capital outlay, you see a decrease in estimated 24 to 23, and that's primarily because we don't have any of the supplementals included yet in this budget document. And then the debt service and lease purchase in 2023, we pay off make the last payment on the streetlight acquisition debt, the 2013A that was issued. And so the only debt going forward in 2024 is reflective of the debt on the FCIP improvements. So next slide, please. So you take your revenues and you minus subtract your expenses, and guess what happens? You take a look at what happens, and if you'll see in your packet, kind of the general fund summary, you'll see that as it stands at this point, the difference of expenses to revenues is about $895,000. So we are upside down in just that general balance. Your goal is to try to bring, obviously, just like you do in your budget at home, you want your revenues to equal or exceed whatever your annual expenditures are. State statute does allow us to use general fund reserves to balance the budget. But again, that's not a sustainable practice. And you can kind of see we've done some of that these last couple of years. We've had these excess fund balances. We thought we had waited till the dust had settled and we were able to capture some of the ARPA funding, or really all of the ARPA funding, as to replace lost revenue and continue to advance priorities like streets and parks and some of our climate action goals and employee support with those funds in 2023. So when we look at the general fund reserve, what you will see is the GFOA recommends not less than 2 months of operating costs to be kept as reserved. The city council policy is 25% of our annual general fund revenues. So slightly different calculation. Typically, our calculation of 25% of those revenues exceeds the GFOA recommendation. So reserves, it's designed to mitigate revenue shortfalls, unanticipated expenditures, and kind of ensure that we have stability in our tax rates. But as we've talked about in previous years, they're really dependent on a variety of other factors that can be unique or different in each community. So depending on what our potential exposure to one-time expenses might be, reliance on other funds, particularly funds that are paying for debt service with sales tax revenues. And then we want to always make sure that we keep an eye on those reserves because it can have an impact on our bond ratings.
Laura, can you remind us what our bond rating agency said about our general fund reserves last time we went to market?
No, I think they were complimentary of our general fund reserves, but
didn't they make a comment that it shouldn't drop below our 25%?
Yes, they like to see it at that 25%.
I had a question real quick, Laura.
Yeah.
Maybe you can get to this at a better time in the presentation, but I was hoping you could talk about maybe what we did in 2015 when we were in a similar situation, it looked like, between the balance and the goal, and how we kind of bumped that up the next year. Or if you don't think it's an apples to apples comparison.
It's not necessarily an apples to apples, and I actually shortened this chart. So if you go back, I think if you look at the, I included the 2023 budget memo in your packet, and that went all the way back to 2008, I believe. And so in 2010, we actually intentionally had a very specific drawdown of general fund balance to restructure debt associated with the Gateway project. And so we dropped below that 25%, and then we were committed to just sort of continuing to rebuild. So what you actually see is kind of that slow, and it was even lower, and then that slow growth, and then the growth really in the fund balance is attributable to just better than anticipated performance in receipt of use tax revenues. And we never would believe it from year to year. It would outperform our estimates. And then we'd say, well, we don't think it'll do it again next year. And then it would outperform the next year. And so that's one of the ways that we really built up the fund balance that we had, is because, and you'll recall that we also, about that 2015 time, were hit with the transportation utility fee litigation. And so we wanted to maintain, without knowing ultimately what the obligation and responsibility would be, we wanted to be able to sort of just hold on to those revenues. And so that's why you see for that period of time, and I can't remember, but I think it was not until 2019 or 2020 when we finally reached the resolution with the class action settlement. But so we were intentionally sort of holding on to those revenues during that time period.
Thanks.
And you may recall that in 2023, we made a recommendation to reduce the general fund reserves to 24% instead of 25% to help accomplish those highest priority projects that had been identified. In 2024, the budget as presented, we've returned, as we committed to that 25% fund balance level. So you can see on that general fund summary that we have sufficient funding to hit that 25% fund balance reserve. Where we start to turn upside down is as a result of some of the other things that we have earmarked or assigned. In particular, we've got $230,000 of the $250,000 that was spent or that we received from the EPC, the locale development. We spent $20,000 of that in 2023 was our match on the Planning Sustainable Places grant. And then the $200,000 that has been earmarked for construction of the dog park. So we hit that ending fund balance in that 25%. But we do need to think about how do we address that structural imbalance for the longer term. And we haven't included, as I mentioned, any supplementals. So let's go next slide, please. So every year, every city, every entity, the wish lists in any fiscal year are generally more than what you can afford. We look at and evaluate those requests for funding based on department needs, council and community priorities, our policy goals and objectives, and the resources that are available. And supplemental requests can really be taken out of any of our funds, not restricted to the general fund. So you've seen us spread expenses between the general fund, our equipment reserve and replacement fund, the MCVB fund, the stormwater utility fund, capital improvement, parks and recreation, sales tax. So in addition to looking at supplemental requests and how they might relate or support our key objectives and priorities or help performance in those key performance areas, we also look at and evaluate those requests as it relates to liability issues. We look at customer service and quality of life. We look at operational efficiencies, best practices, council priorities, connection to our climate goals, and then one-time versus ongoing expenditures. So I would turn your attention now, and I apologize for the small print, but there's a one-page sheet, which is the supplemental budget items that have kind of come forward as a part of the 2024 budget process. And I'm not going to go through all of these in tremendous detail. I'm just going to hit on some, but again, highlighting none of these are included yet in this base budget. So construction inspector, that is something we talked about last year. That cost is reflective of salary and benefits plus a vehicle plus additional equipment that would be required. We're in 2022, we paid $143,000 in outside construction inspection services. And so I think Celia and her staff brought forward this recommendation, thinking there might be a way to realize those efficiencies. That would not necessarily be an impact. Typically, we don't pay for personnel services out of the capital improvement fund. But if that's something we want to move forward with, we would need to look at, that's where the expenses are paid currently on the projects. And so you don't want to sort of ding the general fund for expenses that are already being paid someplace else. So there are a couple of ways you could do that. We have some of the funds that support the CIP, special highway in particular, that does allow for personnel expenses to be paid from that. Or you could look at reducing the transfer. If you wanted to keep that position in the general fund, you could look at reducing the transfer to CIP by a corresponding amount.
The current inspector is the 143,000 for what we've been spending.
So we hire construction inspection services for every project that we do. So it's not always, it's been Pfefferkorn, I think, for most of this, but maybe all of this last couple of years, but yes. So it would be in-house versus an outside inspector.
Is this number, does this include the benefit cost?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes. And a vehicle. So there's about, salary and benefits at about 91, the vehicle at 40 and equipment at 10. Part-time fitness coordinator, this is again, something we'll touch on again next month, coming out of the feasibility study. Drug task force sworn officer, which would be salary and benefits plus a vehicle. This would essentially fund an officer to be assigned to the Johnson County Drug Task Force. And the chief and I are sort of still looking at the benefits. I think, and please chime in. I mean, you've seen a lot of our serious crimes are drug related. And the benefit of this potentially, or the return on that investment, is a portion of any assets that might be seized or recovered through that process. But anything else you want to add to that?
Just that, that task force is also in charge of investigating all the overdose deaths that occur. And they try to take those to the suppliers of the fentanyl and things like that and get those charges filed. And that's the biggest portion of what they're doing right now, throughout the county, with the significant increase that we're seeing in fentanyl related cases.
So a PR marketing contract split between graphics and web support. I think we've talked about our contract with Crux expiring and looking at evaluating services going forward. So this would be sort of in place of some of those services. The Parks and Recreation Department also has marketing included in their budget to support the work of promoting and trying to generate increased activity at the center. Zoning code update, we have $100,000 in funding in the 2023 budget. Our staff capacity is impacting the scheduling of this project right now. And we've estimated potentially another $100,000 to successfully complete the project. So we've shifted that $100,000 to 2024. I think realistically, we might be able to get the RFP out the door by the end of this year, but we have not added anything else. But what we've seen with those consulting projects and our software projects is that, again, sort of moving targets. But we really need to focus on, let's firm up these costs as best we can. Grant matches, I think we've talked about all of those in previous presentations to the council. All of those grants, I believe, are still pending. And so we have planned for how to incorporate those if necessary. Vehicles and equipment. For the last several years, we've been able to cover the cost of all of the vehicles and equipment, or the majority of the vehicles and equipment that were requested each year in the equipment repair and replacement fund. And we've generated revenues. We transferred $200,000 in 2017. We haven't had to make a transfer out of the general fund since then. And that fund is currently upside down. I think it's a function of lead times to a certain extent on vehicles. And so we're not realizing revenues in years when we anticipated them. So that's something that we'll be rolling our sleeves up with the staff to really look at. Is that just an imbalance on paper right now, or what can we realistically expect? Because we are seeing significant value being realized in the vehicles and equipment that we're reselling. It's just when it takes you 12 months to get something, it takes you a little bit, and then get it outfitted and equipped, and then you've got to get the old equipment out. Projects, Johnson Drive landscape maintenance. This is, we had $30,000 that we sort of carry in the public works budget. We have been working with a consultant who's done a walkthrough of Johnson Drive and looked at basically a complete overhaul of all of the plantings. We feel like that's an important investment in the downtown corridor. I think according to that consultant, about every 10 years is the time when you probably need to think about doing that major refresh. And we opened that street in 2014. So we're still waiting on sort of final cost estimates. I think the range that he had provided to staff initially was anywhere between $80,000 and $180,000. So when we get those costs refined a little bit more, as well as trying to get a definitive answer about whether we could adequately source all of the native plants that we would need. We'd like to be able to kick off at least a significant portion of that this fall, and then look at the ongoing maintenance. And then business support, I know is something that we've talked about. That was an area sort of in economic development. We've been doing streetlight banners. We would propose to continue to just refresh and have more options for streetlight banners. We're proposing an advertising campaign that could help support and really promote on a more regional level our downtown businesses. Potentially some holiday decor upgrades, and then staffing to help support their social media and outreach. I think based on the conversations that we've had with our businesses, this support combined with the business improvement grant and some of the other things that we have historically included, the $9,000 estimated for the cardboard recycling program that was just piloted last month, that we hope will be a success, I think helps make that investment and really demonstrates. And I will tell you that although not included in the base budget, there is sufficient funding in the MCVB fund to cover that. At least the advertising campaign, and then some combination of either the banners or that, so that we could potentially accomplish that. Future considerations, technology front end support. I think we continue to really discuss and review the options for strengthening IT support. I don't want to plug a number in a budget until we really know what we want and how much that would cost us. Financial management software, we have carried that potential expense in the general fund for years, and we just can't get to that project. I think based on where we found ourselves financially, and although we're thrilled to have Christine here in her first 6 months on the job, I'm not going to ask her to replace a financial management system that she doesn't even know yet. So we've pulled that, and really will come back with that, something that needs to happen. But we need to make sure that we've got the staff resources to dedicate to that. The full-time sports coordinator, again, something not recommended for the 2024 budget, part of the feasibility study recommendations. You'll see Johnson Drive Metcalf Bridge replacement. We are continuing to work with KDOT and Overland Park to see what any sort of anticipated city cost share might be with that. I think we're making slow progress. And then, as the chief mentioned earlier, crossing guard contract increases. There's some discussion that has occurred already with Westwood, Roland Park, some of the other cities in the Northeast who all use the same company, about the possibility of exploring a joint contract. We just didn't have time to put that together for this year. So we'll continue to explore that, as he mentioned. So there's some of these that we need to figure out how to work in. But where we shoehorn them in is potentially going to be a little bit of a challenge this year. Next slide, please. We've talked about the CIP, and there really isn't anything that we've done in the general fund at this point, or any of these other funds that impacts kind of the CIP program for 24 through 28 that you looked at last month. But the other kind of funds that we manage, there are roughly 20 funds that all come together through the budget process that make up our City of Mission budget. Many of them are either sort of conduit or fiduciary funds, statutorily required funds, but we really focus in these 4 other funds each year. On the MCBB fund, that's where we bring in our transient guest tax receipts. Primarily, about $50,000 of those receipts each year are used to produce the Mission magazine, which again offers our local businesses a very affordable way to advertise and promotes them a little bit more broadly through the region. We funded banners, we funded the design or the walkthrough potentially of the Johnson Drive native plantings and installing the water fountain. Did it end up, I didn't see the name. Did it get a name? Oh, Farrah Fawcett. So Farrah Fawcett at the market site. And again, as I mentioned, this could fund the business and advertising campaign and the banners in 2024. The special alcohol fund, this is a third of the alcohol tax revenues that are distributed from the state that need to be used for the prevention, treatment, et cetera, of drug and alcohol. So typically we contribute a large portion of that to UCS and their Drug and Alcoholism Council. Their request for 2024 was $60,000, which is the same as 2023. We use some portion of that as we can to support a police presence in local schools to do sort of drug education and awareness. And then about $90,000 supports the 2 mental health co-responders, which I know is an important project and priority. Carryover funds from prior years and grant funding that we've had for the mental health co-responder program allow us to continue to fund and recommend all of these at this level in 2024. And our solid waste utility fund, that's the fund that supports residential trash, recycling, and yard waste. The requested increase, or it's actually included as a part of our contract and capped at 3% for this year from GFL is 3%, despite the fact that the CPI for the last 12 months has been closer to 7%. Last year, the increase was 5%. The recommendation at this point would be for the resident rate to stay the same. Residents pay just about $193 annually, or just a little bit more than $16 a month for those services. And then we subsidize the balance of that contract with a transfer from the general fund. That fund can support that, leaving the resident rate the same, particularly if there's an appetite for looking at a change in mill levy, and can fund the cardboard recycling program in the downtown district. And then the TIF and CID funds, we have to maintain separate funds for all of the projects that we have. The distributions out of those funds are controlled by specific development agreements. And currently we have Mission Crossing, Cornerstone Commons, the locale, and in 2024, we will have the residents at Rock Creek as well. So we don't spend more in those funds. So that's kind of, the next slide is about next steps in the budget process. So let's stop there and take a breath and think about reactions, thoughts.
So with the feasibility study discussion with the community center next month, do you anticipate a big swing in kind of what we're looking at for 2024?
I don't think it's going to be a huge change for 2024.
Have we looked at all at the scope of work that people have in terms of trying to narrow the focus of some of the programming and ways that it might reduce cost in terms of personnel and time and effort?
In Parks and Recreation, or just
Well, I know
across
we've
the
done
board?
Parks and Rec
Okay.
through the feasibility, but all, in general, or are we really at the bare bones of what we need to do?
I think that's a challenging question. I think one of the things that we are continuing to work on as a staff, and that's why you've seen us be realistic in pushing some of the funding for some of these larger projects. We know we had the comprehensive plan that was delayed by the pandemic and a variety of other things. All of the studies have seemed to take longer for a variety of reasons. And so we talk all the time about the workload that we have and how that, and the pressures of trying to advance the projects and programs that you have funded in the budget with just the staff and the time that we have. And we kind of talked earlier this year about the amount of time that you just spend on daily administrative type things, whether that's answering a citizen call or coding a property tax deposit, or reading the draft. That looks like a draft of the annual
Calling a
audit.
developer back for the 25th time.
Calling the developer back for the 25th time, fielding calls and questions about, projects. And so I think that, I hope that it's clear that our desire is to take on as much. And I think sometimes we still take on too much. And we feel that pressure. But I think that I don't think we're doing necessarily the wrong things. I think we may be trying to do the right things at the wrong speed sometimes. And some of the department heads may disagree with me on that, but I think generally there are things that we would want to do. They're the right things to do. But I don't know how you solve for that, whether that's.
Well, I think we have some legacy issues that we are carrying, in terms of staff activities that we never really sit down and have a conversation about. I know that we have the family adoption program and other things like that that take up a lot of time during holiday season. And it's pretty intense. I mean, it does take a lot of time and effort, and I don't think people really think about that. And so I would like to, at some point in time, start to have that conversation, where what are we demanding of staff? And is it fair? And is it really core of what the city needs to be doing?
Has a question as well. I just wanted to clarify. I want to make sure that we're trying to figure out sorry, it's getting late in my mind. We're trying to figure out how to close this $900,000 gap in the budget, right? This is the feedback you're looking to us for.
I think it depends. I don't know what, yes, I mean, I think it's some variation, somewhere between $900,000 and then whatever else we think we need or want from the list of supplementals.
From what I feel like I've read through and reviewed, I'm getting the sense of the what if, we never left the 18.5 mil mark. Is that from staff, which would bring in about $500,000? Is that what you're saying is if we were to consider a mill increase, like, is that the kind of figure you and perhaps the mayor have discussed?
Yeah, I think we have to at least start to move in the direction of restoring mills that we've lost. And I know the mayor has probably even stronger opinions than I do about that.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm happy to be the one to go out on a bit of a ledge on that, which I think, at least for purposes of setting our not to exceed rate for the revenue neutral resolution that we'll have to pass on July 19th, that we should set it at that 18.5 mils. We'll still have 2 months of budget discussions to decide if that's the right number. But if we set it lower than that, we can't go up. We can't come down from that 18.5 mils. And I think, we shouldn't be a council that shirks addressing the structural imbalance that's been identified. And I know as a group, one of the number one frustrations of this council has been, the councils and leadership of decades past who didn't do what needed to be done and didn't have these tough conversations and saddled us with a lot of really expensive deferred infrastructure that's part of the problem that we're facing today, with the amount of stormwater work that we need, the streets that we need, the parks that have been left, alone for 20 years. And so looking at all of that, I think we've been very unhappy with governing bodies that have sort of passed the buck in the past, and that we shouldn't be that governing body. And so I think, we need to think about our budget in terms that is responsive to our citizen needs and wants. And I think this budget is very driven by what we've seen in our direction finder surveys and other citizen feedback, that they want us to be making investments in things like our streets and parks. And that's what we've been really focused on. And then we also need to be responsive to the reality of the increasing costs. There's the figure in the budget memo that the costs needed to attract and retain our talented personnel alone exceed the amount of revenue increases that we've been seeing. And so I think, we have to face reality, and we as a governing body have to be willing to have these tough conversations. And so I would rather us start with the number that isn't going to hamstring us over the next 2 months of budget discussions.
Thank you, Mayor. And, I'll just respond a little bit. I agree. I appreciate your leadership. No council or mayor wants to be the one that brings this to the table. But you're right in terms of deferred maintenance and everything that's put off for so many years. I would encourage us to, be more conservative, at least in our preliminary discussions for tonight, and thinking about getting closer to that 18.5 or maybe higher, because if we're talking about that only generating 500, that's still a $400,000 gap. But I would really appreciate staff, Laura, if you could share a little bit about some tax relief programs, maybe either from the city level or the county level, so we can make sure to highlight
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
even though we're talking about maybe $9 a month, for some households that can really impact the bottom line for some folks.
Yeah, and I know that has always been a consideration, and I will say that Mission has been a leader in in the property tax rebate and tax relief program, I think back in 2004. And so there was a time, and you've heard me talk about it before, where the mill levy for years was 5.12 mills, which was second lowest mill levy in the entire state of Kansas. And that was worn very proudly by many council members, but we see what happens. And so when the mill was increased back in that time period significantly to start to begin to address deferred maintenance in stormwater, that was kind of the same time the stormwater maps, FEMA floodplain maps were revised. The property tax relief program was put into place in 2004, I believe. And so consistently, I don't have the budget number right here in front of me. We haven't seen a lot of increase or additional interest in that. But certainly if we looked at a mill levy increase, there are adjustments that could be made to program guidelines. We could also look at, taking a specific portion of any increase that you might consider at a mill levy and dedicating that to grant or assistance programs. I think we've seen historically, and I think we could do a better job of promoting, but I think we've struggled to get in recent years, businesses to take advantage of the business improvement grant. So we could look at on those kinds of matching grant programs, whether that's, we could look at, decreasing the amount of resident or business funds that might be required to really help alleviate some of those kinds of things.
Yeah, and as I think about it, I think that's exactly right, is to think about it in terms of targeted relief for those who need it and adapting our programs accordingly, rather than saying, even though residents are telling us they need and want these services and improve roads, et cetera, that we can't make it happen because we don't want to increase the tax burden on those who can't afford it. Instead, we should think about the relief that can help our residents and businesses who need a little bit of extra assistance.
I support the mayor's recommendation of the 18.5 mil, but I also want to call our attention to the fact that we're also discussing tonight property abatement policy for individuals. And it kind of goes against my general feeling that we support tax abatement when we're then turning around and creating property tax increases on residents. So that's.
And let me just jump in there. And I think, again, I think because of our inexperience, and I know Councilmember Thomas had asked for sort of a side-by-side comparison of TIF and tax abatement. So and we're working on that. But I also think that as part of the tax abatement in a much different way, you're going to see sort of the cost benefit analysis. So probably a clearer comparison than what we maybe have been used to in terms of the benefits of a TIF project, for example, of really understanding what we're gaining for what we might be what we might be giving up. And I think that's part of the reason why you adopted a policy that didn't go to 100% tax abatement. You capped it at 75%. And I think that's certainly something that could be negotiated in any of these. We know the drill. We don't have to do what the developer asks for when they walk through the door. And so we have to look at that. But I understand and appreciate that. And I think it's a balancing act to say, do you have, what are we getting? What will the impact of that new development be on sales tax revenues? What will the impact of that be for our local businesses and some other things?
The other thing that I would ask us to do is to not, I guess, indict our past councils for what they did in their situations. I think that they made decisions at the time that were consistent with what they saw, and we're doing the same thing. So I would be really reluctant to look in the rearview mirror and say that this is something that was sloughed off and brought to us today. You've been here for 19 years with regards to budgets,
Yep.
and you've seen each of those budgets debated and adopted.
Yes, absolutely. And I would agree with that, but I also think that we've made a very conscientious effort through asset inventories and a lot of the work that we've done to quantify the need for the future. And when we know what's out here, we need to make that plan. You're right. We need to be looking forward now that we know what's in front of us as opposed to backward to, where we've been.
And when I said decades, I was meaning multiple decades away. I'm referring to those councils that Laura was talking about that, prided themselves on having the second lowest mill levy in the state, regardless of what that got you in terms of actual constituent needs and services. But yes, I agree. It needs to be forward looking, but I think it's part of the reality of the situation that we face today is that deferred maintenance is very expensive, regardless of, how it came about. It's a reality that we have to face.
It is a reality. And I think we've talked too about the fact that, I don't know how many times you've heard Celia talk about the infrastructure that we have wasn't built to standards which may have extended its useful life. And so part of what's increasing the cost as we move forward is, again, that very deliberate decision to make the investment in doing it the right way in accordance with appropriate specifications.
Yeah, I just have one last comment. If this were to move forward, I know we're just talking about it more just in practice, so we can move through the budget process. But if this were to move forward, at 18.5, that would still leave us next to Mission Woods, who we know, doesn't have it's very small, would still leave us as the lowest mill rate in Northeast Johnson County. And, we're talking about Merriam and Roland Park, our two most comparable cities, are at 26. We are competing with other cities with our hands tied behind our backs, and we just can't keep doing it and have it be sustainable. So,
yeah.
Thank you, Mayor.
I do want to also remind us that we have a community center that was built historically that is now we make use of. We have redone our aquatic center and we make use of that in the community. So when I talk about scope, I really am meaning to say, we have broadened the scope of what the city was once upon a time. And it does come with cost and benefits for the community. So I think we really need to be mindful of what we are carrying in terms of the total cost of the city and time and effort by staff.
Yeah, just kind of back to Ken's first comments 10-15 minutes ago or so about talking about staff and, the time spent on projects. I hope that we could still continue to push for realizing some more operational efficiencies on our side. I still get a little concerned by hearing, folks talk about, I just don't have any time to work on strategic stuff. I'm playing whack-a-mole. I'm responding to kind of squeaky wheel requests all the time. And considering the talent we have in-house here, I really want to give folks space to be able to really operate on those long-term visions that provide value not only to the city, but also increase their morale, and well-being. I've had really good talks, with Emily over the years about this and others on staff. And so, if we could continue to kind of keep a broad brush look at our own practices, continuing to push people towards like the report of concern tool online, realize ways to kind of be a little more efficient with our time. I think that's another way to kind of continue to see some more gains in here that maybe are related to what we had initially talked about. And I also appreciate Holly's comments on the mill levy. I think that's a very reasonable path forward, and I'd be interested in exploring that more too.
Well, with that helps us be able to put together really, I think, more robust scenarios for you to really look at. and make some better decisions on as we move forward.
Laura, will we have that detail for the 19th before we're
So,
setting that
Yes,
revenue
so
neutral?
originally in our budget schedule, we had thought we would be ready to have our community dialogue on the budget and a work session ahead of our July 19th meeting. We aren't there. But I would suggest that we hold that work session as planned. That will give us a chance to look at the final audit numbers, make sure we've got everything trued up, present you some different scenarios and come back with that. We still have plenty of time. We would then, if you go to the next, oh, you're there. I didn't get the July 19th work session on there. Then on August 2nd, we would be able to bring back kind of the final after that work session, August 2nd at Finance and Admin. Then have the community dialogue on ahead of our August 16th city council meeting. That will also be after the notices would be sent out with respect to the revenue neutral rate or the proposed mill levy rates. And then again, because of timing with the revenue neutral schedule, you have to hold your budget public hearings between August 20th and September 20th. That doesn't align with either one of our council meeting dates in August or September. So we have tentatively scheduled a special city council meeting on September 6th. We did that last year. We had it on September 7th. So ahead of the committee meetings where we would have the public hearing on the budgets and then adopt those budgets. And then we have until October 1st to certify the budgets to the city council or to the county. So between now and July 19th, there are enough versions of the budget that I can drop different scenarios in and I think get us to some things that will illustrate a little bit more clearly what we hope to accomplish. And that is all I have on the budget this evening.
Any other final thoughts, comments on this?
Nope.
All righty. Finally, this evening, we have our department updates. Ms. Smith, are there any department updates for finance and administration? I don't know. Okay, cool. Awesome. All righty. Well, with that, it is now 8:41 p.m. and with no further discussion, that concludes the meeting of the Finance and Administration Committee. Again, this video will be made public on our website at missionks.org. Everybody.